Hi everyone, and welcome back to our next video. In the last video, you were introduced to the Arduino UNO microcontroller, and now we're going to take a look at how you can use C++ with it. So, don't worry about being able to set up this circuit yet. All we have here is what we call a push button circuit, and this just supplies an input to the Arduino board. Basically, it supplies a voltage. If the push button is not pushed, it sends a certain voltage to the board. If it is pushed, it supplies a different voltage into the board, and that's how the board knows whether or not the push button has been pushed. Over on the left over here, we have an output circuit, and that is simply a LED that we can turn on if we want to, and we can turn that on with this port here, port D13. So how do we do this with code? Well, let's take a look. You're going to go over here and click on this. And what that does is brings in our IDE in order so that we can code. And the way it's set up looks a lot like P5 when we did P5. We're going to have a void set up here. And this function only runs once when the Arduino is powered up. And it has to start with an open curly brace, which is right here. And then inside void setup, what we're going to put is we need to define what we're going to use for pins or ports, and if they're going to be inputs or if they're going to be outputs. So notice here we have a command called pin mode. Pin mode basically tells the Arduino UNO that we want to use pin 7 as an input. So you can see that right here. I'm sending in a voltage from my push button circuit. That's going into pin 7. That's an input. And then I'm going to use port 13 as an output right here. That's D13. That's going to output to this circuit here. So what I can do is I can send out a voltage to this circuit if I want in order to turn it on. So in void setup, we're defining the input and output ports. Void loop is the function that runs over and over again. And in this case here, all we're doing is we're doing what we call a digital read. And what that does is it constantly reads this port here, and it looks for the voltage to be either low or high. If it's low, it's 0 volts. If it's high, it's 5 volts. And depending upon whether or not we push the push button. If it reads it as a high signal, we've got an if condition here. If it reads it as high, it's going to do a digital write. Well, what a digital write does is it outputs a high or low signal, in this case, a high signal to port 13. In other words, it will turn on this circuit, in other words, the LED, if the push button is pushed. If it's not pushed, it will perform this else, and it will say, do a digital write. In other words, send out a low signal to pin 13. In other words, don't turn on the LED. The only way we turn on the LED is when we push the push button. If I start the simulation, we can take a look at this here, and you can see in this case here, it's on. So it's actually on right now. If I push it, it turns off. If I let go, it turns on. And if I push it, it turns on. So we're going to talk about the voltages and that, but all I really want you to see here is that this push button circuit, along with the code, controls this output circuit here, the LED circuit. So that is how you can code using C++ inside Tinkercad. We just have to click on this here and we can code. Once we think we have the software and the hardware complete, we can start the simulation and check to see if it works as expected. So that is it for this tutorial. What I suggest is you take a screen capture of this just so you have everything here, and then try to build the same thing inside Tinkercad. Take you a few minutes to put together all of the hardware and then code in the software, but then you're going to have your own copy that you can modify and change.